Hi, my name's Rob Scott and welcome to UC Summit 2022. So today I'm joined by John Creech, who's a sales director at EPOS, and Jon Arnold, who's a tech thought leader and industry analyst. And together we're going to be discussing how you can best evaluate today's meeting room applications, room kits and devices in the hybrid workplace. Welcome everybody.
Thanks for having us, Rob.
Okay, yes, glad to be back, Rob, and looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining me. Just before we dive in, how about we just do a quick round of introductions? John Creech, would you like to go first?
Yeah, my name is John Creech. I'm a sales director for EPOS. EPOS itself is a division of the Demant Group, which is a European-based leader in hearing technologies. A few years back, Demant collaborated with Sennheiser to develop class-leading headsets for the enterprise, gaming, and air traffic control markets. And EPOS is the brand that carries that legacy of Sennheiser and Demant collaborations forward. So while we're a young brand, we're backed by more than 100 years of experience in hearing research and sound technologies. And today we offer a world-class suite of headsets, speakerphones, and video conferencing solutions for enterprises of all sizes.
Fantastic. Welcome, John. And Jon Arnold.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm principal of my analyst firm, J. Arnold and Associates. So I'm an independent tech analyst, and I've been following collaboration technologies for over 15 years as an independent. I started out with Frost & Sullivan years ago, so I come out of the analyst firm world, and our job is to follow the trends, break them down, and help everybody out there make sense of what's happening and why.
Fantastic. And making sense is exactly what we need to do, isn't it, in the meeting room right now, because there's all sorts of things happening. Lots of challenges exist today for organizations kind of trying to work their way through the hybrid work or hybrid world even. So just to kick off, I mean, John Creech, let's start with you on this one. I mean, how has the meeting room changed in the past 12 months?
Yeah, well, I mean, hybrid work continues to take shape, right? So an increasing number of meetings and creative collaborations, will be shifting and have shifted to virtual meetings. And integrated audio and video solutions are still going to be essential for today's professionals. Our research shows that we now spend over 7 hours a week in virtual meetings on average, and that's an increase of 40% over last year. Sadly, our research also showed that 89% of all end users are currently experiencing some challenges when they're having these virtual meetings or workshops. So happily, the decision makers are recognizing that the quality issues that bad audio and bad video can cause, and good solutions exist that can help persuade employees that virtual meetings can still be just as productive as live options. But we're finding that might not be enough. That human connection that people get from face-to-face meetings is still very powerful. And this to be replicated in the virtual world requires technology that is smarter and offers a more natural experience. And so I think a lot of the solutions that you're going to see both EPOS and some of our competitors provide will be underpinned by those guiding principles, right? Are these things going to be easier to use and better to leverage for us humans?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Hey, John, what's your perspective of the marketplace over the past 12 months? What kind of really stands out for you?
Yeah, well, I'm with John on this one that, meetings have become such a central part of how we do everything now. And hybrid has just kind of hardened the need for these hybrid environments of, some people are at home, not as many in the office now, especially with Omicron, but this fluid nature of what work is and what constitutes a meeting space is an interesting question itself, right? Because it used to be where that's a place where everyone went to meet in person because that's what you did. But now hardly anybody is in the actual physical space. Now we have these virtual spaces. And I think back, a few years ago, guys, to when Cisco came out with telepresence. And I'm sure you remember that. And the whole idea, as is with how American companies like to do things, bigger is better, right? So the idea of having a life-size meeting experience seemed to solve that problem of space and time, right? But too expensive, too cumbersome. It's like setting up a home theater. And now it's eventually the technology is condensed, and now the desktop experience has become what I call good enough for everyday meetings. So now that meeting space in the last 12 months has become kind of like, almost like, you think about your car, right? When you drive a car, years ago, your car was a very simple experience. Today, it's completely a multimedia experience. It's almost like the cockpit of an airplane. And that's what the meeting room is becoming now, I think. Not just so much what's in the physical room, but also on our mobile devices and on our screens. All of the new features that have been added in the last, really, even in the last 12 months, I think you'd agree, John, both in the software, on the applications, but also in the hardware. You think about all of the video monitors, the bars that go across the top of the room, etc., and all the different microphone setups, and of course the headsets. It's become a very tricked out experience. I think you'd agree that it's not just a simple matter of showing up at your desk, turning on the computer. There's so many other things that go into what the meeting experience has become now. It's good because it's so effective and so, dynamic. But on the other hand, it's if you're not good with these tools, it could be kind of an intimidating experience.
Yeah, so I think user experience is a huge challenge, isn't it? And for organisations, they've got to get that right, and then for the vendors ultimately. So, I mean, that's a nice segue into my next question. And back to you, John, on this. In terms of kind of the challenges that do exist right now for organisations, I mean, we've come a long way in a year. I mean, from the start of maybe the pandemic, with just deploying video into meeting rooms, but we seem to be kind of moving on much further than just simple deployments of cameras. But what are organisations faced with today?
Yeah, and John touched on some of this, right? There's so many different communication and content platforms for both local and remote use, whether they're meeting inside of a huddle room on occasion, traditional meeting rooms, or at home. And finding solutions that are easy, reliable, and candidly, agnostic, right, is a sort of holy grail. And so a lot of our clients are prioritizing that usability component, even if there's a slight cost premium on the solutions itself, because they can decrease the fatigue, they can increase participation rate, and candidly, the employees are demanding it, right? They just simply won't show or have a bad showing if they can't get into the bridge or can't leverage the tools. So I think you're looking for that usability component to increase, its profile within the organization. And I think we're just now starting to see professionals looking at more balanced approach, right? Some of us are getting back on the road, have attended some trade shows in the last few months. The pandemic is absolutely, still a factor, but I think, working professionals are starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel, and they really want that interaction. Being able to read facial expressions and body language improves our ability to gauge people's reactions to our ideas and allows the conversations to flow in a much smoother manner. Right? And this is especially important in group discussions where you have to almost convince people, right? Like pulling teeth to click the mute button and to have them participate. Whereas in a live conversation, that becomes a much more natural thing. So anything that can replicate that is certainly valuable from a technological standpoint. But those are some of the challenges that we see people facing and trying to move through, in this year.
Yeah, it's really interesting, especially around the quality element. And we talk about, I suppose we almost take it for granted, don't we, the quality of, a webcam or an audio device. But actually, if you get it wrong, it can be completely disastrous, for the, user experience and the end-to-end kind of, I suppose, presence or that feeling of having a reasonable conversation. So would you agree there, John? Is that something that comes up time and time again with your customers?
Well, yeah, and come back to what I said earlier about the good enough idea. We're trying to be vendor agnostic here, but I can't help but say that, Zoom was kind of like the big winner from the pandemic in terms of having the right technology at the right time. And by making that easy to use and free and good quality, reliable experience was just a godsend, because we couldn't have done this collaboration without those tools. As you said, if there was a lot of, whatever, poor image quality, blurry audio, all the delay and jitter and everything, we wouldn't be using it. But it's become so good that it's become our first response. Like, no one picks up the phone anymore, right? Like, not every call has to be a video call, right? But it seems to be the default now. It's almost like, oh, why are you calling me? We could just do a video call. So videos become kind of the default, for better or worse. And thankfully, it's economics of abundance, right? Broadband is cheap. Broadband works. It can support all these calls. So if it was a problem network-wise, we would have heard about it by now. So I think these are the unsung heroes. And that creates some of those challenges, right, that I'm sure you would see, John, too, is, okay, well, now the bar is set so high on video. Now we're starting to do it for everything. And now we're trying to push to, like, the high def and, all of a sudden, the 4 and 5K level resolution or 8K resolution. All of a sudden, we're trying to get almost like a cinema quality experience. And it's really the challenge falls to the carrier to maintain this broadband experience. And of course, on the mobile devices with the 5G coming, it's just going to get better and better, which is good. But the challenge is, how do you keep it going, like having a good quality experience without problems? And when I say problems, we talk about security breaches, right? And then, you have all these issues about, well, if it's not a good experience, I won't use it. So it's like people can be very unforgiving with video too, right? If it's not good, they won't come back to it. So, the adoption issue, which we talk about a lot, is people will only use these tools if they have utility and serve their purpose. And that's where those endpoints come in handy, I would say so, John. As you said, having the great headset makes it a nice experience. As long as it's a good experience, people will stick with it. But as soon as that quality drops off, people will stop using it. So the bar is really high. So I see a big challenge is how does IT, how do the platform providers keep it there and, of course, keep it secure? We've had those security breaches happen before. So now there's a push for encryption end-to-end, right? Keep everything safe. And the more this replaces phone calls, the more important those capabilities are. Even though the phone is sitting on our desk unused, right? We all have a phone on our desk somewhere, but we're hardly using it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned the desire to have that higher quality connection. I think, inherently we all want to look at pretty pictures and hear nice sound. We've done some research on the back end, right? A large part of Demont is focused on hearing aid and all the technology there and the science of hearing. And what we found is that, our ears are just the first step. Most of hearing is done by the brain, where we discern human voices. We pull out nuance, we pull out tone, inflection, associate meanings with those things, in addition to the words and the interpretation that goes along with that. And so what we're seeing is that while it's true, video is becoming more ubiquitous, we're becoming very comfortable using these remote technologies. The fatigue level of workers and employees using these technologies is starting to increase. And you can literally get tired just listening to a low quality call. It's actually physically more fatiguing to do that. And so that's where we're starting to see the leadership kind of put more focus on improving that quality. To John's point, they're making sure they've got the bandwidth to support these things. We're going with higher quality cameras and low noise levels in the environment. So there's absolutely a physical correlation with user health, worker health related to that quality component. Those kinds of things should absolutely be considered as part of any kind of a solution analysis.
And let's not forget, with so many people working from home, it's not an ideal environment for a lot of people to be doing things like live, real-time communication, especially at scale when you're on meeting calls all day long. So that to me is another challenge for sure, outfitting that home office. Not everybody has broadband, etc. There's a lot of challenges there. Forget about the fact that people are in their sweatpants all day and don't want to be seen. That's a whole other issue too, right? About, do I really want to be on camera? And that's a generational thing too.
Okay, that's it. It's really interesting, isn't it? As you say, lots of challenges exist. Let's move on to some of the kind of solutions and technology that's been, that's out there right now. We've seen a lot of vendors really accelerate their roadmaps across the pandemic, just to get, their video products and solutions kind of out there as much as possible. And also they've really stepped up to the plate with kind of fixing some of these real kind of COVID related issues as well. So I'm keen to explore kind of, from your perspectives, what you kind of see as the kind of, technologies that really stand out and that are helping to solve some of these problems. I mean, John Creech, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I think some of the larger trends we're seeing kind of fall into three buckets. On the video side, it's about making sure that meeting is as personable feeling as possible. So that could include speaker tracking, right? When you see, or someone in a particular room or location is speaking, we've got cameras that are now panning and trying to put the focus on the speaker. That helps on the receiving end, right? To not be so distracted by someone else who might be, doing something else in the room. We see larger adoption with some of the more advanced licensing. So, for example, our Capture 5 product will work with Microsoft's Teams licenses and allow for dictation in an automated fashion. So for those who couldn't attend the meeting, or maybe it was, that there was some bandwidth, issue or latency, you can now get a transcript, right, of not only what was said, but also who said it. So we're seeing that technology kind of come to the forefront to cover, the edge cases there where you might have had some issues. And then the third one that's huge in my industry is going to be noise cancellation. That takes the form of both passive and active. So the ability to isolate a human voice, separate that out from background noise on both, the transmission end and the receive end, right? So as a home office worker, to not hear the sounds of kids and animals and those kinds of things going on in the background, and to get nothing but the voice from the other end, to try to reduce that fatigue level and to increase the perceived quality. So those are the three areas that we see the most technological investment and the most bang for buck is whenever you've got those kinds of solutions that you can incorporate.
That's great. And John, from your perspective, what are you seeing? Because you kind of look at the whole marketplace, what really stands out for you?
Yeah, there's a few things that are really good. We haven't talked about AI yet, but it really is one of the underlying threads to what's happening now. And the AI really helps enable, that touchless experience for a meeting, right? And I think it's really important because it's very much in line with the pandemic and this whole, what I call RTO, return to office. If you want to bring people back into an office, they've got to feel safe about it, right? So the more touchless that experience can be, they're going to have a more comfortable time working in that kind of socialized environment. Otherwise, they'll just sit at their desks all day and not get up and leave. It also becomes a little more sophisticated when you get higher end AI capabilities in a room to start monitoring things about social distancing, right? To ensure that people are keeping apart, the room isn't exceeding capacity. Those are practical considerations for meeting technologies that aren't about the meetings themselves, but more about, compliance for the office itself and the landlords who run the buildings to make sure that their spaces are being used safely. Another good thing that I like are all these new features that are being added to make that meeting experience as much like the real thing. So I'm talking about things like digital whiteboarding, for example, where you have like virtual sticky notes, in the meeting. So it becomes a much more interactive experience that's more like a real meeting when you get up and write stuff down. And that's also, we'll get to the immersive stuff in a minute, but it's also showing up in the immersive AR kind of space as well. I mentioned security earlier. That's another big one. And so you're going to start to see more use of things like audio signatures as a way, like biometrics, as a way to, again, touchless way with a voice to access a meeting, but also to protect your streams, right? Because otherwise, if your session gets hacked, people when they can start getting a hold of your voice streams, that's where the bad side of digital technology can go. One more thing to just kind of mention is you talked about the acoustic stuff, John. There's other stuff around acoustic fencing. In other words, when we talked about meetings, we think of enclosed spaces. Well, also, there's plenty of opportunity for ad hoc meetings that happen like in hallways, in open kind of areas and offices where you have meetings on the fly, but there's no rooms available, right? So with acoustic fencing technology, it's a way to ensure that only the audio that's picked up in the space designated for that meeting, even though there's no walls around you, you'll pick up the audio. So in other words, you'll see people walk by your space, but they're not in this open space meeting. They're talking, but that audio isn't getting picked up. That's a really cool use of that technology to kind of like create new spaces that become viable for meetings that are beyond just the regular four-wall kind of environment. I think that's a pretty nice way to kind of extend the opportunity for more meetings, especially the ad hoc stuff. Again, that's more lifelike, right? You know, can I grab you for a minute? Let's just set it up. Oh, no meeting room? Can we just go in this corner? We'll turn on the fencing. We have our own safe space. That's really, I think that's a really progressive way to use the technology for making meetings more accessible.
That's fantastic. Lots of great technologies, lots of advice there. My final question today is kind of looking into the future a little bit. Now, John, go to you on this one first. But, you know, we've seen recently, certainly, you know, through the pandemic, an explosion of immersive technologies such as kind of virtual reality and mixed reality coming through from vendors, especially in the consumer world. However, do you see that kind of playing into the kind of business world in 2022? Should enterprises, organizations start preparing for, you know, these kinds of technologies coming into the kind of meeting and collaboration space?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, all the big players have made announcements. You know, Microsoft has had HoloLens out there for a while. You know, Facebook, Meta, and the Oculus OS. I think even Apple is rumored to release something in Q1, Q2 of this year, or at least make an announcement. So I think we're right on the cusp of some interesting offers. By virtue of having been, you know, in a couple of different, you know, UC and CC positions in the past, I've seen some of these virtualized offers, you know, positioned with clients. And I'll tell you, the challenge remains the user preference to interact with a face versus an avatar. So I think, in my opinion, augmented reality will likely win out versus a 100% virtual reality experience. But I think later this year, you'll see a number of different options and a number of different offers that companies will begin to play with, right? And they would be wise to do so. It's going to be a situation, I think, where they're not sure what the use case is until they've been there, and something develops organically from within those organizations. I think initially we envision these as taking the place of something that exists today. And I think, technologies of the past have demonstrated on a number of occasions that it could be something that we don't even envision right now that ends up being, you know, the killer use case for some of these technologies. So absolutely, I think 2022 will be an interesting year for the tech. And it'll be interesting to see, you know, what those offers look like.
Yeah, absolutely. John, what's your perspective?
Yeah, you know, I'm glad you made that distinction, John, because there is that mixed reality thing, and then there's the kind of the virtual where you have no people. It's strictly just those avatars. And I think what's going to drive that, you mentioned earlier, John, about video fatigue, right? Yes, we want to see people talking face to face, but it's tiring. It really is demanding after a while. And I suspect the virtual version of that will probably be less draining on us. So that might serve as an alternative to kind of make it more accessible for longer periods of time. And it's also, too, you know, it is a generational thing where the digital generation growing up being kind of native to gaming environments, they're very familiar with this kind of virtual world. And I think for them, you know, I hate to say it, but you have to use a little bit of gamification every now and then to keep people's interest, especially for younger generation. And so the avatars creates another way to kind of, you know, yes, you know, you can do the same thing as in person, but now you can like have a little more fun with it, right? You can create personas with your avatars and faces and colors and outfits. And you know, it might be a way for some people who aren't comfortable being on camera to feel a little bit more part of the team. You know, you can be more interesting with a virtual persona than you are in person. Some people don't like the way they look on camera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one way to do it. Another aspect is the hologram thing, right? So now you're talking about that augmented reality, which is different from virtual, where you're mixing in-person with virtual. And that's going to, as you say, John, I agree, will open up new use cases where you have people who are in virtual environments who can be collaborating with you in real time. And you've seen this in all the movies, right? They create this image, this effect. And Microsoft is betting big on it with Mesh. And it comes down, when you talked about the challenges earlier, guys, bandwidth, right? Do we really have enough bandwidth to support this kind of experience at scale? And I'd say probably no. I'm sure the processors inside the computers have to get a lot bigger. And I think, like what you say, John, we haven't invented a lot of this stuff yet. So I think next generation, this is where companies like NVIDIA are going to drive a lot of this, right? They're going to create microprocessors and boards, etc., that will create probably new devices that aren't like our smartphones, that aren't like our PCs. Microsoft is already planning for what I call the post-PC world, where these screens will go away entirely and they'll be replaced by what we call ambient interfaces. This is more future of work stuff, Rob, that I do a lot of work in. But this video experience, really, you've got to have new technologies to make it work at scale. And we're not there yet. But it's fun to talk about, and we'll get there in steps, right? But also by that time, the millennials will be so far, along the curve of running the workforce. They're going to be the buyers. Don't forget, they're not just the users. And they'll be ready for this to be buyers and deploy it in their organizations. We'll see it within 5-10 years. I have no doubt.
Yeah, very exciting. As you say, fun to talk about it, but maybe not something enterprises need to, really consider in 2022, unless they've got a really good use case for that kind of technology, of course. But I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. John and Jon, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here. Looking forward to seeing everybody at the event.
And thanks to everyone for watching. If you've enjoyed today's session, there's lots more to explore at UC Summit this year. And don't forget to follow the big UC update hashtag on social. I'm Rob Scott from UC Today. Thanks for watching.